Let me tell you something about getting old that nobody warns you about. It's not the creaking knees. It's not the reading glasses you leave in every room of the house. It's not even the doctor visits that start feeling less like checkups and more like progress reports on your own slow demolition. No, the thing nobody warns you about is your own children. Welcome back to Dad's True Revenge. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember the people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You're going to love it here. My name is Walter Prescott. Walt. To the people who actually like me, and trust me, by the time this story is over, you're going to understand exactly why I had to keep a very short list of those people. I'm 67 years old. I spent 41 of those years building something. A landscaping company that started with one rusty truck, 2 employees, and a prayer that the engine wouldn't die on the highway. By the time I was 55, Prescott & Sons Landscaping had 14 trucks, 32 employees, and contracts with half the commercial properties in the county. Sons. I called it Prescott & Sons because I believed with everything in me that one day Derek would want to be part of it. I should have named it something else. Now, I need you to picture my house, a 4-bedroom colonial on Maple Ridge Drive. Nothing flashy, but solid. The kind of house that says, someone worked hard here. I bought it in 1988. Raised Derek in it after his mother, Linda, passed from cancer when he was 12. Just the two of us, rattling around in those 4 bedrooms, eating cereal for dinner more times than I'd like to admit. I gave that boy everything I had. And I mean that literally. Which, as you're about to find out, was the single biggest mistake of my life. About 3 years ago, Derek and his wife Amber moved in with me. Now, before you ask, yes, I invited them. I want to be honest about that. I invited them because I'd had a minor heart episode. The doctor had used words like, take it easy, and reduce stress. And Derek had shown up at the hospital with flowers and that wide-eyed, concerned look that I now recognize as the face people make right before they start calculating your net worth. Dad, he'd said, squeezing my hand in that hospital room, Amber and I have been talking. We want to be there for you. We want to move in, help around the house, make sure you're okay. I looked at him. This man, my son, my blood. You sure? I asked. Dad, you're all I've got. Hook, line, and sinker, Walt. Hook, line, and sinker. I want to pause here and tell you about Amber, because Amber deserves her own introduction. Amber Prescott, formerly Amber Stills of Beaumont, Texas, was the kind of woman who smiled with every single tooth in her mouth and meant absolutely none of it. She had this way of saying the most cutting things in the sweetest voice, like pouring hot sauce into a chocolate milkshake and handing it to you with a smile. Walt, you look tired, she'd say, emphasis on tired, looking at me like I was a piece of furniture that had overstayed its welcome in the living room. Walt, are you sure you should be going up and down those stairs at your age? At your age? I was 65 when she said that. 65. I've been climbing stairs since before her parents were born. But I smiled because I was raised right and because at that point I still believed family was family. I was going to need a serious attitude adjustment on that belief. The first year wasn't terrible, I'll give them that. Derek helped with some yard work badly, but he tried. Amber cooked on Sundays. Nothing spectacular, but edible. And my grandson Nolan, their 12-year-old boy, was the one genuine ray of light in that house. Nolan. Oh, that kid. He'd come sit with me on the back porch every evening. This scrawny kid with his grandfather's nose and his grandmother's eyes, and we'd just talk about baseball, about school, about life. He used to say, Grandpa Walt, you know more stories than anybody I've ever met. That's because I've made more mistakes than anybody you've ever met, I'd tell him. He'd laugh. Lord, that kid had a good laugh. But here's the thing about rays of light. Sometimes they're the only thing illuminating how dark everything else around you has gotten. By year 2, the smiles were getting thinner. Derek had started what I can only describe as a quiet campaign, small things at first. He'd mentioned very casually how the business might benefit from fresh leadership, how some of my older methods were costing us contracts, how maybe it was time to think about the future. I'd look at him over my coffee cup and say, "The future looks fine from where I'm sitting, son." He'd smile, but it never reached his eyes. And Amber, Oh, Amber was always nearby during these conversations, never speaking, just a presence. The way a chess player sits quietly while their partner makes the move they suggested. Then the big task came. We were sitting at the dinner table, me, Derek, Amber, and Nolan, and Derek cleared his throat in that rehearsed way that told me this conversation had been practiced in their bedroom the night before. "Dad," he started, "Amber and I have been thinking, you've worked so hard your whole life, you deserve to rest. What if you signed the business over to me officially? I'd keep your name on it. Prescott and Sons stays Prescott and Sons, but I'd take on the real responsibility." The table went quiet. Even Nolan stopped chewing. I put my fork down slowly, looked at my son, then at Amber, who was studying her green beans like they contained the secrets of the universe. "Let me think about it," I said. I had already thought about it. The answer was no. That quiet, undramatic, perfectly reasonable no, was apparently the beginning of the end. Because after that dinner, something shifted. The house got colder. Conversations got shorter. Amber stopped cooking on Sundays. Derek started spending long evenings in my home office. My office, on phone calls, he'd cut short whenever I walked past. And me, I started paying attention. I started noticing things. Documents moved on my desk. Mail opened and resealed badly. A visit from my attorney, Franklin Bancroft, that Derek asked about with just a little too much casual interest. "Oh, what did old Theo want?" he'd ask, leaning in the doorway like he hadn't been waiting for me to get off the phone. "Business," I said. He smiled that smile again. I smiled back and I thought, not for the first time, I need to make some phone calls, but I didn't make them fast enough. It was a Tuesday, an ordinary, unremarkable Tuesday in October. The kind of day that has no business being the worst day of your life. I was heading down to the basement to find a box of old business contracts Theo had asked me to locate. I remember the exact moment. I had one hand on the railing, one foot on the second step, and I was thinking about whether I'd left the contracts in the blue box or the brown one. When I felt it, two hands flat against my back, and then I was falling. I don't remember all of it. The human brain, God bless it, has a way of protecting you from the worst frames of a terrible film. But I remember the sound, the horrible, percussive sound of a body that is no longer in control of itself. And I remember the cold of the concrete floor when I finally stopped moving. I lay there in the dark. Something warm was running down the side of my face. My left arm was screaming. The light from the top of the stairs was a small, cruel rectangle above me. And standing in that rectangle, I could see him. Derek just standing there. "Maybe now he'll get the message," he said to someone behind him. To Amber, I realized. Amber, who I could hear laughing softly, "Let him rot down there," she said, and the light disappeared as the door closed. Now, here is where I need you to pay very close attention because most people at that moment would have screamed. I would have cried, would have begged. I have never met most people. I lay on that cold concrete floor, bleeding, one arm that felt completely wrong, stars swimming in my vision, and I did the most Walter Prescott thing I have ever done in 67 years on this earth. I reached into my shirt pocket. I found my phone, and with fingers that were shaking but certain, I made one call. 12 seconds of consciousness left, maybe less. And I used every single one of them. What did I say? Who did I call? And why? When Derek and Amber finally opened that basement door 2 hours later, was there already a car in my driveway that made Derek's face go completely white? If you've made it this far, do us one quick favor. Subscribe. A lot of people watch without ever doing it, but it costs you nothing and means everything to us. Thank you, genuinely. Let me tell you something about rock bottom. People always describe it like it's a place you arrive at slowly, like there are warning signs, exit ramps, somebody standing on the side of the road with a flag waving you down before you get there. Nobody tells you that sometimes rock bottom is literally rock bottom. Cold concrete, total darkness, and the sound of your own son's footsteps walking away from you like you were nothing more than a problem he'd finally managed to close the door on. That was me that Tuesday in October. But here's what Derek never understood about his father. I didn't build a company from one rusty truck and a prayer by being the kind of man who stays down. Let me take you back to those 12 seconds. My vision was doing that thing. You know the thing where the edges of everything start going dark like someone is slowly turning down the brightness on the world. My left arm was useless. Something in my ribs was having a very loud, very unpleasant conversation with the rest of my body. And the side of my face was wet in a way that I didn't want to think too hard about. But my right hand worked and my phone was in my shirt pocket right where I'd kept it every single day for the past 11 years. Ever since a doctor had told me, Walt, at your age, you want to keep that thing close. At my age, there's that phrase again. Well, Doc, turns out you were right. Just not for the reasons either of us expected. I got the phone out. Don't ask me how. I think when the human body understands that this is the moment, it finds resources you didn't know you had. My fingers found the screen, found the contact I needed. One name, Theo Bancroft. My estate attorney of 19 years. Now, I need you to understand something about Theo Bancroft. Because the man is not just a lawyer. Theo is what happens when you cross a pit bull with a filing cabinet. He is meticulous, relentless, and has a memory like a steel trap that was manufactured specifically to hold other people's secrets safe. Theo and I had been meeting quietly for the past 6 weeks. Ever since I'd noticed the moved documents, the open mail, the way Derek's eyes tracked every conversation I had that he wasn't part of. 6 weeks of quiet, careful, deliberate preparation. What Derek didn't know, what Amber, with her ceramic smile and her calculating green bean studying eyes didn't know, was that Theo and I had already been rewriting my entire estate plan slowly, methodically. The way you diffuse something dangerous without letting it know it's being diffused. But we hadn't finished. There were 2 signatures still needed. 2 documents still unsigned. And as I lay on that basement floor, I understood with perfect, terrible clarity that if I lost consciousness without making this call, if I slipped away in that dark and Derek got to the paperwork first, everything I'd built for 41 years would land in the hands of the man who had just pushed me down a flight of stairs and called it a message. Not today. Not today, son. The phone rang twice. Walt? Theo's voice was immediate, alert, the voice of a man who had been half expecting this call. Walt, it's late. Are you? Basement. My voice came out wrong. Thin, ragged. Not my voice at all. Fell. Hurt. Theo, listen to me. A beat of silence. Then, very quietly, I'm listening. The documents. The 2 we haven't signed yet. Walt. Theo. I said his name the way I used to say it in negotiations. The way that meant stop talking and hear what I'm telling you. Transfer everything. The house, the business, the accounts, all of it. Transfer it to Nolan's trust tonight. Whatever you can do tonight, do it. The rest when I wake up. Another silence. Longer this time. Walt, I need you to say that clearly for the record. I'm recording this call. God bless that man. Walter Prescott, I said, and I have no idea where I found the voice. Instruct my attorney, Theodore Bancroft, to execute the transfer of all primary assets to the Nolan Prescott Trust, effective immediately, pending my signature upon recovery. Derek Prescott and Amber Prescott are to be removed as beneficiaries. Completely understood, Theo said, and then dropping the lawyer voice entirely, Walt, who did this to you? But the darkness had already decided it was done waiting. I don't remember anything after that. I woke up to the smell of antiseptic and the sound of a monitor doing that steady, indifferent beeping that hospitals use to tell you that you're still technically a participant in the land of the living. My left arm was in a cast, 3 ribs cracked, 8 stitches above my left ear, and a concussion that the doctor described as significant, which I have learned is medical language for, sir, you really need to stop having adventures. But I was alive. And the first face I saw when my eyes focused properly was not a doctor, not a nurse. It was Gloria Hensley, my neighbor from 2 houses down, 61 years old, retired school teacher, the kind of woman who notices everything and forgets nothing. You gave me quite a scare, Walt Prescott, she said, and her voice was doing that thing voices do when someone has been crying but wants you to think they haven't been. Gloria. My throat felt like sandpaper. How did I? I heard it, she said simply. I was on my back porch. I heard the sounds, and then nothing. And something told me to come check. She paused. The front door was unlocked. I found you. I stared at her. You saved my life, I said. She straightened up in that prim school teacher way of hers and said, well, someone had to. It was another hour before Derek and Amber arrived. I want you to picture this carefully, because the choreography of what happened in that hospital room is something I have replayed in my mind more times than I can count. And every single time, I enjoy it just as much as the first. They came through the door together, Derek in front, Amber half a step behind, her signature position close enough to influence, far enough to deny involvement. Derek's face was arranged into an expression of concern, so practiced it could have won a regional theater award. "Dad." He came to the bedside, reached for my hand. "Dad, we had no idea. We thought you'd gone out. We didn't know you were in the basement. We were looking everywhere." I let him talk. I've learned that if you let people talk long enough, they start filling in silences with things they never intended to say. Amber was the one who finally thought to check the basement door. "We feel absolutely terrible. Absolutely terrible, Walt. Just sick about it." I looked at her. She looked back at me with those wide, innocent eyes, and I thought about the words, "Let him rot down there," and I smiled. Not a warm smile, not a forgiving smile, the smile of a man who has already made his phone call. "I'm sure you do," I said pleasantly. It was Derek who noticed him first. He'd been mid-sentence, something about making sure this never happens again, when his eyes drifted to the chair in the corner of the room, the chair that neither of them had looked at when they'd walked in, too focused on performing their grief for my benefit. Sitting in that chair with a leather briefcase on his knee, and the calm, unhurried expression of a man who has nowhere else to be, and all the time in the world, was Theo Bancroft. Derek stopped talking. The room went very quiet. Theo looked up from the document he'd been reviewing, smiled politely. "Derek, Amber, good of you to come." Derek's face did something I had never seen it do before. It cycled in the space of about 3 seconds through confusion, recognition, and then something that looked very much like the specific terror of a man who has just realized he may have miscalculated something enormous. "What?" Derek started. "Why is your lawyer here, Dad?" "Oh," I said, adjusting my pillow with my good arm, keeping my voice perfectly conversational. "Theo's an old friend. He heard I was hurt. He came to check on me. At Walt's age," he said it without a trace of irony, and I nearly bit through my cheek, trying not to laugh. Derek looked at me, then at Theo, then back at me, and I watched the thought move across his face like a slow, catastrophic wave. How long has he been here? What has he been doing here? What has already happened that I don't know about? "We should let your father rest," Amber said quietly, and for the first time since I'd known her, her voice had lost its sweet coating entirely. What was underneath wasn't pretty. "Yes," Derek said, stiff now, careful. We'll come back tomorrow, Dad." "I'll be here," I said cheerfully. They left. Theo watched the door close behind them. Then he opened his briefcase, produced a document, and set it on the tray table in front of me with a pen. "Feeling well enough?" he asked. My ribs ached. My arm throbbed. My head felt like it had been used as a bowling ball. I picked up the pen. "Hand me that," I said. Now Derek thought the worst was over. He thought it was a setback, a close call, maybe a need to regroup, rethink, come back with a better strategy. What he didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that by the time they walked out of that hospital room, it was already done. The house, the business, the accounts, gone. Not to the state, not to charity, not to some distant relative. To Nolan, his own son, the 12-year-old boy who used to sit with me on the back porch and tell me I knew more stories than anyone he'd ever met. And now, I had one more story to tell. The last one, the one that would change everything. If you've been listening for a while and want stories like this to keep coming, it really helps if you hit that like button and subscribe. 97% of people never do, but it's what keeps this whole thing running. So, thank you for real. There's a particular kind of silence that settles over a room when someone realizes they've lost. Not the silence of peace, not the silence of rest. The silence of a person standing at the edge of something they cannot take back, looking down, understanding fully, finally, completely, that there is no ladder, no rope, no second chance. Quietly waiting in the corner with its hand raised, just the edge and the drop. I've been in enough boardrooms, enough negotiations, enough hard conversations, across enough difficult tables, to recognize that silence the moment it arrives. And when it arrived, when it finally arrived, it was even sweeter than I had imagined. I spent 11 days in that hospital. 11 days of bad jello, aggressive physical therapy, and nurses who called me Han in a way that was either endearing or deeply patronizing, depending on what time of day it was. Derek and Amber visited 3 more times. Each visit was a masterclass in performance. Derek brought flowers the second time. Actual flowers from an actual florist, not the gas station variety, which told me he was nervous. Amber wore less makeup and softer colors, which told me they'd had a strategy meeting about optics. They were warm, attentive. Derek fixed my pillows. Amber asked the nurses questions about my recovery, with the focused intensity of a woman who has recently Googled how to appear like a loving daughter-in-law. And every single visit, Theo was either in the room or had recently been in the room. His briefcase, his coffee cup, some small evidence of his presence, always visible. And every single visit, I watched Derek clock it and say nothing. The flowers got more expensive each time. I accepted them graciously. I am not a cruel man. I just believe very strongly that people should be allowed to fully commit to a performance before the curtain comes down. Gloria came every day. She'd bring her crossword puzzle and sit in the corner chair, Theo's chair, when Theo wasn't in it, and we'd talk or not talk in that comfortable way you can only do with people who don't need anything from you. One afternoon she looked up from her puzzle and said, completely unprompted, I always thought there was something off about that daughter-in-law of yours. Only the daughter-in-law? I said. She gave me a look over her reading glasses. I was being diplomatic. Gloria, I said. You once told the HOA president his landscaping looked like a cry for help. It did, she said, and went back to her crossword. I laughed for the first time in what felt like weeks. It hurt my ribs considerably. It was absolutely worth it. I came home on a Thursday. Theo had arranged everything with quiet, surgical precision, the way he arranged all things. The documents were signed, witnessed, notarized, and filed. The transfers were complete. The Nolan Prescott Trust was fully funded and legally airtight, overseen by Theo himself as trustee until Nolan turned 25. The house, my house, the 4-bedroom colonial on Maple Ridge Drive that I bought in 1988 and raised my son in, was no longer in my name either. It had been transferred to a separate trust managed by Theo, with me holding lifetime residency rights. In plain language, I could live in it until I died, but Derek couldn't touch it, couldn't sell it, couldn't leverage it, couldn't inherit it. The business, Prescott & Sons Landscaping, 14 trucks, 32 employees. The thing I had built from nothing had been placed under new management structure with Theo on the board, pending a formal sale to a private buyer that Theo had been quietly arranging for the past 3 weeks. Derek's name appeared nowhere. Amber's name appeared nowhere. Not in the house documents, not in the business transfer, not in the financial accounts which had been restructured around Nolan's trust. 41 years of work. Every truck, every contract, every dollar, redirected, clean, permanent. I didn't tell them immediately. I know. But hear me out. I came home on a Thursday, settled into my armchair, accepted Amber's offered cup of tea with a grateful smile, and listened to Derek talk for 20 minutes about some improvements he'd been thinking about for the business. I nodded at the appropriate moments. I said, that's interesting twice. I drank the tea and I thought, let them have Thursday. Let them have the comfortable lie of Thursday where everything still feels like it might go their way because Friday was coming. And Friday, I had asked Theo to come by the house at 10 o'clock in the morning. He arrived at 5 minutes to 10, which is how Theo Bancroft has arrived to every appointment in the 19 years I've known him. Early enough to be ready, not so early as to seem anxious. I was already in the sitting room. Derek and Amber were in the kitchen, and I called out with complete casual pleasantness, Derek, Amber, could you come in here? Theo's here. We need to go over a few things. I heard Amber say something low to Derek. I heard Derek say, just stay calm. They came in together. Derek looked at Theo's briefcase, already open on the coffee table, documents neatly stacked, and something moved behind his eyes, something that looked the way a building looks in that fraction of a second between the demolition charge firing and the walls actually starting to fall. Still standing, already done. Sit down, I said pleasantly. Please. They sat. Theo is not a dramatic man by nature. He doesn't embellish. He doesn't editorialize. He presents facts the way a surgeon presents a diagnosis, clearly, completely, without flinching, and without any particular interest in how the patient feels about receiving them. He opened with the estate restructuring. He explained in plain and thorough language that my primary assets, the house, the business, and the associated financial accounts had been transferred effective the evening of my hospitalization into protective trust structures. He explained that these transfers had been made at my explicit recorded instruction. He explained that Derek and Amber had been removed as beneficiaries. He explained that Nolan Prescott was now the primary beneficiary of the Nolan Prescott Trust, which would be administered independently until Nolan reached adulthood. He set the relevant documents on the coffee table, turned them so they faced Derek and Amber, and folded his hands. And then the room went very, very quiet. Derek stared at the documents. He stared at them the way a person stares at something when their brain is receiving the information but actively refusing to process it, like a computer screen that's frozen, cursor blinking, waiting for a system that has simply stopped responding. Amber's face had done something I had genuinely never seen it do before. It had gone completely, entirely still. No smile, no warmth, no performance, just still. Like every mask she owned had been checked simultaneously and found to be useless. I don't. Derek started, stopped, started again. Dad, what is this? It's fairly self-explanatory, I said. You can't. He looked at Theo. He can't do this. He was injured. He was on medication. He wasn't in his right mind when. I have the recorded call time-stamped at 10:47 the evening of the incident in which Walt gave his instructions clearly and of his own volition. I also have his signature on the primary documents obtained at the hospital 2 days later, witnessed by 2 independent parties and a notary. He paused. I anticipated a competency challenge. I prepared accordingly. Derek stared at him. You anticipated? He turned to me. Dad, look at me. I looked at him, my son, 53 years old, sitting in the same room where he'd unwrapped Christmas presents as a child, where he'd sat across from me after his mother's funeral and cried until there was nothing left to cry. My son, who had put his hands on my back at the top of a staircase and made a choice that could not be unmade. Why? He said, and for just a second, one single unguarded second, he wasn't performing. It was a real question, raw and genuinely confused, like he truly could not understand what had gone wrong. I took a breath. Because I heard you, Derek, I said quietly. When you walked away, I heard exactly what you said, and I heard what Amber said. And I decided, I continued, that the man who built this family with 41 years of his hands deserved better than to rot in a basement. Amber stood up. She stood up so abruptly, the chair scraped back across the hardwood, and for one moment she looked like she was going to say something that would have singed the wallpaper. I could see it building, all that carefully managed sweetness burning off like fog in direct sunlight, showing whatever had always been underneath it. But she didn't say it. She looked at me, then at Theo, then at the documents on the table, and she walked out of the room. A moment later, I heard the front door close. Derek didn't move for a long time. Then very quietly he said, "What about Nolan?" And that question, that one question asked in that particular voice, was the first honest thing I'd heard from my son in 3 years. Nolan is taken care of, I said. Better than you know, better than he knows yet. I leaned forward slightly. That boy sat with me on my back porch for 2 years and talked to me like I was a person worth talking to. Whatever else happens in this family, Nolan is going to be fine. Derek put his face in his hands. I let him sit with it. They were out of my house within 2 weeks. I won't dress it up or make it more dramatic than it was. There were no more confrontations, no screaming matches, no Hollywood ending with tears and reconciliation in the driveway. Just boxes and a moving truck, and Amber directing the whole operation with the clipped efficiency of someone executing a strategic retreat. Nolan hugged me the morning they left. He held on longer than a 13-year-old usually lets himself hold on. And I felt him breathe in that shaky way that means someone is trying very hard not to cry. "Grandpa Walt," he said into my shoulder. "I didn't know. I want you to know I didn't know." "I know you didn't," I said, "and that's one of the reasons you're going to be okay." He pulled back, looked at me with those eyes, his grandmother's eyes, and said, "Can I still come sit on the back porch?" I looked at this boy, this good, undeserving, completely innocent boy who had been living in a house full of calculation and had somehow managed to remain entirely uncalculated. "Nolan," I said, "that porch has your name on it. I still live on Maple Ridge Drive. Gloria still comes over with her crossword puzzles. Theo still arrives 5 minutes early to everything. And on weekends, most weekends now, a 13-year-old boy with his grandfather's nose and his grandmother's eyes sits beside me on the back porch, and we talk about baseball and school and life, and sometimes he asks me, 'Grandpa Walt, you ever regret it, the way things turned out?' And I look out at the yard, at the garden, at the place I built and held and refused to let go of, and I say, 'The only thing I regret is not making that phone call sooner.' Let me leave you with this. The people who try to bury you are often counting on one thing, that you'll stay buried. They are counting on your exhaustion, your grief, your willingness to believe that because they are family, they must mean well. They are counting on you not having Theo Bancroft's number saved in your phone. So, let me ask you something before you go. Do you know who's in your corner? Do you know who would pick up on the second ring at 10:47 at night and say, without hesitation, 'I'm listening'? Because when the door closes and the light goes out and the cold floor is the only thing beneath you, that is the only number that matters. My name is Walter Prescott. I am 67 years old. I fell down a flight of stairs and I got back up. If you like this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being a part of the Sphere.